weeks later with my recorded fieldwork presentation. I have been extremely busy, so I kind of have put this off a little bit. But first, I would like to talk about the activities that I engaged in. Now, I was under the impression that what I would be going through would be more like educational, and I would get to see opportunities of these children, working with others and being educated on subjects and having mentors that come in and speak to them, but a lot of that actually didn't happen. So most of the activities that I engaged in were a lot about getting the kids active and making sure that they were coexisting with each other without fighting. So a lot of the things that I did with them were based on play and games. But when Stack did come in and talk about, the harmful effects of tobacco and nicotine and these types of substances on your body, that was really the only educational opportunity I sat through with the children, and I was surprised to see that they were actually very engaged. Even though they acted out quite a lot, they were actually very engaged with the subject, and I was very glad to see that. But mainly throughout the course of my internship, I engaged in many games of pool, tag, mum ball, catch. Any game with a ball or any game focused on chasing each other, like you name it, I probably did it. I also did a lot of arts and crafts with them, such as coloring and drawing. We would oftentimes color a lot of these stained glass window pictures, and we would hang them up in the windows so people passing by could see them and the children could see them every time they came in. We also drew up retirement cards, so we let the kids kind of be creative and do whatever they wanted, because one of the staff members that had been there for over 40 years was retiring. We also did a lot of bracelet making and slime making. I think for sure that the slime making was some of their favorite activities, and it was mine too, because everybody really got along. It was the one activity where nobody was fighting at all about anything. I also played many games / board games as well. Like, I played the Game of Life with a couple of kids. I played Uno a lot with some of the kids, and I also played Jackbox a lot with some of the kids, which is basically a TV-based game where you can answer questions on your phone and everything, and you can play different games. A lot of the games that we played were like murder trivia parties, so it would ask you questions and things like that, and you kind of had to figure out the correct answers so that your character didn't turn into a ghost and die, so that you were the one that ended up collecting all the money and surviving in the end. From time to time, I would also engage in prepping dinner for the kids, as well as serving the children their dinner and drinks. Now, most of the time, I didn't really prep or cook. It was mainly just serving the kids, but sometimes I did help the other staff members with dinner before the kids got there, whether it was cutting up any sort of food, watching over the stove, flipping any type of meat, just basic stuff, really. The cooking was mainly left to like 1 or 2 people most of the time, so I didn't do a lot of that. I also engaged in typical cleanup procedures with the rest of the staff, such as sweeping floors every night, mopping floors, checking windows and doors, making sure they're locked and they're closed correctly, cleaning tables and countertops, dishes, and feeding the pet bunny that lives at the youth center. His name is Jack. He's very, very cute. I tried to make it my priority to engage with every child on a day-to-day basis, doing an activity that they enjoy, but sometimes it was hard to get some of these kids engaged because they came in a bad mood, or, well, typically they came in with a bad mood, so that's why they wouldn't want to do anything, or they were fighting with their friends. Every day was a gamble a lot of the time. But I also made it my goal to try to counsel them and help them work through their emotions on a daily basis, because a lot of times on a daily basis there was a behavioral outburst of some kind, and you have to learn how to de-escalate it. And I think that's very important for the career that I want to go into, because I will be dealing with children that have gone through an immense amount of trauma. So I really need to learn how to speak to them properly and make sure that they feel safe and secure. I try to provide a safe space with the children at the youth center, somebody that they could talk to without fear of judgment or repercussions, but sometimes they did face repercussions when they were doing things that they knew they shouldn't have been doing. I have also engaged on many occasions in one-on-one conversations with some of the children, more like de-escalation type stuff. In some instances, I was trying to get them to calm down, fix their behavior, or act as that safe space, as I said before. I did face a lot of issues, however. Being at the youth center was never without its problems. Every day tended to be a gamble, like I said before, on whether you'd go home completely drained or go home cheery and smiley and everything. At first, most of my issues stemmed from being a shy girl who found it hard to interact with strangers, because a lot of these children would almost prey on, these shy and just quiet individuals. They would almost try to bully you into doing things that they wanted to do, and it was really hard to step out of my comfort zone and make sure that they didn't bully me into anything that I didn't want to do. But eventually I got to that point and I was able to say, like, no, I don't want to do that, we're not going to do that. And eventually they got comfortable with me too and knew what I probably wouldn't do and what I would do with them. I would still face issues from time to time regarding what the specific rules were for the youth center though, because I would get mixed ideas on what they were based on what staff would tell me, what the children would tell me, and then the behaviors that the staff would allow to slide, because they let a lot of things slide sometimes. So it was kind of hard to tell what the rules were when they were letting these things slide. Issues I faced almost daily happened to be children constantly at each other's throats for some reason or another. One minute they would be best friends, and then the next minute they would be fighting or arguing over something. I mean, it was all the time. And it was always stemming from something super small, but then it would turn into something that was completely blown out of proportion, and it would get physical. A lot of the children really didn't have what most would consider a proper home life, and they were rarely supervised properly, so their behavior was pretty much always allowed without consequence, which was the major issue that I faced. How I overcame the issues: I found myself talking to other staff members a lot, and I would try to find guidance and understanding in them, because they had dealt with these children for so long. And I talked to them about the problems that I was facing, and they would try to talk me through things and guide me and come to my defense when needed, because there were times that they needed to come to my defense because the children were being disrespectful. They would always support me, and I was really grateful for them at the time. They helped me find my voice at the youth center and, be more assertive. Oftentimes, I would also tell the children that their behavior was unacceptable or disrespectful, and I would try to guide them on ways that they could better approach, whatever they were going through. A lot of times, they didn't want to listen to you, but it's the thought that counts. I did find myself mentally drained a lot, so I would also consult my boyfriend and talk to him every night. Of course, I would exclude any defining details about any of the children or staff members, because that's very important when it comes to privacy and respect of these individuals. I'd also take a lot of walks to just kind of mentally de-stress after having a hard day, because some days were very difficult. My mental health honestly went down the drain during the entirety of this internship, but regardless, I'm still glad that I did it, and I really do care for those children a lot. And there were many things that I learned. I think one of the biggest things that I learned is that sometimes your past really does affect you to a point where your behavior really cannot be controlled. I used to think that even if you had a bad home life, that you didn't have to project that anger onto others, but I've come to realize that some of these kids really don't know any better. They don't have good role models in their lives teaching them how to cope, with the trauma that they've been through in a proper manner. These kids really are good kids, and they really do want the best for themselves. They don't want to be mean to others. They don't want to act out. They just want someone to help them, and I think that was the biggest realization for me. And I've also realized that oftentimes the only time they'll get help is if they're constantly acting out to the point where they have to be monitored 24/7, which is really sad to think about. While I was already aware of this before, trauma in childhood does affect every child differently, and I learned many stories and saw various ways that the children were affected by previous instances that they had been through. But even when observing siblings, because there were siblings there, you could see, how one sibling had coped versus how another had. And it's very interesting to see how reactions to trauma can vary from child to child, especially sibling to sibling, because there was a case of two siblings, and the older sister seemed to be very mature coming out of this horrible situation, but her younger sisters seemed to be very immature, and she had a lot of behavioral issues, and a lot of times the older sister would be breaking up the fights that the younger sister would be causing with others. So it was really interesting to see how they went through the same exact situation, but the way that they carry themselves is completely different. I also learned how important proper parental guidance is. I'm sure that all of these children would thrive if they had better home situations, but they ended up becoming a direct result of their home environment, so they fell into all of the traps that essentially their parents fell into as well. There were times that I believed you could succeed even if you had horrible guardians or parental figures, but I never really understood how hard that could be for children their age, because I never really saw the extent of the trauma that they went through and how it affected them. But at the youth center, I was able to, like I said, hear many stories and see the ways that these children were going about life after going through all of those horrible things. And I know that in class we would talk a lot about, mental upbringing, I meant childhood upbringing, and how that can contribute to later crimes. Being at the youth center really opened my eyes to just how important it is to intervene, to teach these children healthy habits, and to be that one person that they can depend on in a world full of people that failed them. I do have a little bit of information that I'd like to share. I did not take any pictures of the youth center, and I did not take any pictures of the children or with the children because I wanted to respect their privacy and I didn't want to come into their space with a camera. I really didn't know any of them that long, so I didn't want to freak them out, and I definitely wasn't comfortable with asking for a picture. Yes, I do care for these children, but I didn't think it was right in these circumstances and in that space. I really had to ease into forming bonds with them as it is, so I just didn't want to get into any sort of pictures or anything. But overall, I really do think that I may consider, trying to get a job there next summer so that I can work with the children one last time before diving head first into my career. Because at the end of the day, no matter how hard the day may have been, they really did make a lasting impact and impression on me, and I really care for them wholeheartedly.